the art world. Hello, everybody. I think it's fair to say that the art world and the fashion world like each other a lot. But we can be a little bit shy with each other sometimes. My name is Colleen Milliard. I'm at Basel's executive editor, and it's a little shyly that 6 months ago I sent an email to Edward Enninful asking if he would perhaps consider come to Paris and curate a day of talks for us here at Basel Paris. Imagine our delight when he said yes. The timing could not be better. Edward has just launched a radically new media and entertainment company, EE72, which I recommend all of you to check out immediately. We just had the first printed copy in my hand today, and it was extraordinary. So Edward is an editor, but Edward is also a curator. He's been working with the Musée d'Orsay, he's been working with Galerie Gros-Pac, an extraordinary Maplethorpe show last year, and next year at Tate Britain in London, he will unveil a major exhibition dedicated to the cultural significance of the 1990s. So for us, here at Basel Paris, Edward proposed to create a prelude to this exhibition, inviting 4 artists whose work has come to define the decade. Mark Leckey, Jürgen Teller, Sonia Boyce, and Yinka Shonibare. Over the course of this afternoon, Edward will be in conversation with all of these artists. But before I hand over to him, and we all revisit this really important time that come to define in many ways the era we live in today, I just want to say a few thank yous. I want to say thank you to Annick Lemoine, the director of the Petit Palais, for hosting us here. I want to thank Edward's team, and in particular, Elia Al-Nakib, without whom this program would not have happened. I'd like to thank the Art Basel team, and in particular, Simon Sixou, whose dedication to this program is beyond words. And I'd like to thank the artists and Edward for creating a moment where maybe for an afternoon, we stop talking about fashion or art, and we start talking about culture and about the things that bring us together. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Yinka Shonibare and Edward Enninful. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for the incredible introduction. I guess we just dive straight in. We're in the presence of one of the greatest artists of our time. Needs no introduction. I've always been such a great fan, through the 90s, through the 90s till now, and I'm so happy that you agreed to be a part of this. So thank you. And we'll dive straight in. We're here to talk about the 90s, so let's go. And the first question really is, you came from an incredible time. You were part of a great group of artists. I mean, Steve McQueen, Glenn Brown, Jake and Dinos Chapman. What was it like to be a part of such an incredible group? That's one question. And then maybe also let us know what it felt like to be in the middle of what seemed like the most exciting time in the British art scene.
Well, the one thing that was really important about that time, like going from, because I think Margaret Thatcher stopped being prime minister, I think it might be 1989, somewhere there. There was a recession.
Yeah.
Many office buildings were empty in London. And, many of us artists, we had nothing to lose. We could take over a building. And that was a time when squatters' rights still existed.
Mm-hmm.
So even I painted in a squat. And none of us had any money as well. So there was a kind of, and also the most important phenomenon was the Goldsmiths College phenomenon.
Yeah.
So I did my MA at Goldsmiths College, and Michael Craig Martin was an American tutor. He was teaching at Goldsmiths College.
Yeah.
And Michael Craig Martin came with this incredible, because my generation thought, well, out with the romantic idea of the artists, with no money and everything. We'll kind of just do everything ourselves. So it was a kind of very entrepreneurial group. And we just take over buildings, do this amazing exhibition and everything. So I met all the artists. I mean, some of them were doing kind of, menial jobs. And I knew, people like, Jake and Dinos Chapman, Tracy Emin, Sarah Lucas, Chris O'Feely, yeah, Steve McQueen, yeah, and everyone just kind of did their own thing. And then, but another important factor was, so we were doing all those shows, then all of a sudden, Charles Saatchi
Yes.
came into, and he started buying. Charles Saatchi before Charles Saatchi, contemporary art wasn't big in England. It wasn't that big. Germany was big. And out of Germany, Alstom Kiefer, Basel Leitz, Jörg Immendorf, all those artists were kind of coming out of Germany. And then the New York scene arrived. So there was like, Jeff Koons.
Yes.
When Charles Saatchi started buying work, then the whole thing kind of just exploded. And then there was sensation at the Royal Academy. And sensation, when, by the time sensation came around, we've all been working for at least about 5 years.
Yeah.
But the general public, didn't really kind of get into that. But there was a queue around the block.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. And it was actually the beginning of arts, artists becoming more like, rock stars.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the 90s thinking, there's this young group of artists who were not scared of success.
Yeah.
We're not scared of making money, which is
yeah.
the word before then.
Yeah, you didn't. I mean, the people who taught me, would rely on education, art schools, and they'd be teaching. They'd be teaching for years. Whereas we were flying to New York and flying, And I remember my first show in New York was at the Grey Art Gallery, and in that show, I was actually Glenn Ligon was also in that show as well. I mean, Glenn Ligon, is really big, well known now. Mona Hatoum was in that exhibition as well, and we're all kind of young, and so it was kind of very and also having a conservative government, a right-wing government, brought out the rebel in you. So many of us were kind of, anti-Thatcherite and everything. But ironically, because Margaret Thatcher, she started cutting funding to everything, right?
Yeah.
And that meant, actually, ironically, Margaret Thatcher, by default, kind of created stars. Because basically, you had no choice, right?
Yeah.
Because, you're not going to get a grant or get any kind of government support. So you might as well just go out and get it yourself.
I remember sort of at the same time in the fashion industry, there was a group of sort of creatives, all working class,
Yeah.
all suffering from Margaret Thatcher's cuts,
Yeah.
and wanting to create and disrupt the status quo.
Yeah, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin. These are kind of all working class kids, know.
It felt like the 60s all over again in a funny way. But why do you think that your specific group managed to sort of change the course of the art world, well, not just in the UK? What did you all have individually?
Well, I mean, I think it's that the kind of can-do spirit. You're not going to wait for anyone you're not going to wait for the market. Why wait for the market when you can do it yourself? And then just to invite people. The most famous exhibition, of course, at this time was Freeze.
Freeze by Damien.
It was the show that Damien Hirst curated. And there are people like, Sir Lucas, Anya Galacho, and, many artists of my generation were in that show. Yeah, so I think it was just that can-do spirit. You can do it yourself. But interestingly enough, there were not many black artists at that time.
Yes. I mean,
So we
we
were
spoke
like
about this earlier.
a kind of new phenomenon. And so there was like, there was Chris O'Feely and Steve McQueen and myself. We were with commercial galleries. So we totally sold out. We were with commercial galleries. And, but I think that at the same time, there was also a parallel going on of very strong work by black artists. I mean, the first show was called The Other Story, curated by Rashid Oren, and that was at the Haywood Gallery. And that was shocking because he basically put in a lot of artists dealing with kind of post-colonial discourse. And that was completely new in Britain then. And commercial galleries actually used to say at that time that they couldn't sell the work of black artists.
That's interesting.
They said they couldn't sell the work of black artists, but something happened. Basquiat came out to the US.
Because most people
But-
would think Basquiat was sort of from the 80s, but he did, there was a 90s period you were saying there.
Yes, Basquiat actually had a show, and I remember that show really well, at the ICA in London.
I see, yeah.
And he did a residency. He was actually painting, in the kind of basement of the ICA. And he made some of those paintings there. And I remember just going to see that show, with my friends. And you think, wow, this is really cool. He had a show later on at the Serpentine, but that was much, much later. It was already, he'd already passed away by then. And so when Basquiat arrived, with, and Basquiat did that collaboration with Andy Warhol.
Yes.
Yeah, and that came to London. And so he was this kind of real cool kid, from New York. And then I guess the gallery thought, oh, wow, we could sell this stuff.
And then you talked about the ICA.
Yeah.
How did sort of these kind of creative hubs like the ICA help you as an artist progress in that period?
Yeah, so the ICA is the Institute of Contemporary Art in London,
yes.
for those of you who don't know. It was a great meeting point, and it was really cool to be intellectual. I mean, we're all reading, Derrida, Foucault. I actually listened to, Edward Said talk at the ICA, Gayatri Spivak, all these kind of great intellectuals. And so there was no Tate Modern at that point. London's art world was kind of fairly small. But then Charles Saatchi had a space, in North London. And that was the first time I saw, even Alsem Kiefer, huge, paintings by a German artist. So, but the ICA was the real kind of hub for fashion, dance.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember so many parties there.
Yeah, and film. You could go and pick a film you wanted, and you could just watch it there. I mean, it was really incredible. I met a lot of people there: Eko Eshun, John Akomfra, Isaac Julian. I mean, Isaac Julian. I met all of these people at the ICA.
That's,
Yeah, so it was like a real hub.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember there was the most exciting exhibitions were always there. I'm going to go back to talking about being a black artist. It's something that we can both relate to in a time. I mean, everyone looks at the 90s now. It's like nostalgia. It was such a great time, but it wasn't the easiest time to be a black artist.
No.
It wasn't the easiest time to be a black creative. So basically, how did you navigate the 90s, basically? How did you navigate an establishment where you were one of the few?
Yeah.
What can you teach, what can you teach
Well,
people
I mean,
today?
it's not about I think it's more a kind of cultural thing, right? So yes, you know, I grew up in Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
So, and I didn't even know I was black in Nigeria, to be honest. You know, so
No, this is so true what Yinka said. It's like, I also grew up, spent my early years in Ghana, and I remember sort of coming to England at the age of 12 and literally realizing everybody was white. Because where I'd grown up, you know, everybody was black, the president, the doctor, the nurse, everybody. So I kind of
yeah,
understand, yeah.
I didn't realize I was black until I came to the West. And so, you know, people are saying, oh, you can't do stuff because you're black. I'm from Nigeria. We do stuff. Sorry. Yeah, you know, so I just didn't, you know, I didn't pay attention to it. You know, I've got stuff to do and I'm going to do it. You know, so, but it was difficult for a lot of artists. I know that. And artists couldn't get shows. Commercial galleries wouldn't work with them. But artists also did their own shows. You know, Lube Nahimit, for example. You know, she made shows. She did a famous show at the ICA called The Thin Black Line. It was, you know, kind of mostly artists dealing with post-colonial issues. And then there was the publication by Rashid Arin called Thought Text, which I used to read as well. A lot of it's post-colonial art practice. And America, I mean, incredible artists coming out of, you know, the US, you know, David Ammons, yeah, you know, Kara Walker from New York, Glenn Ligon, Fred Wilson. You know, actually, many of those artists, Naomi's got that show at Palais de Tokyo. And so many of the artists in that show, but a lot of them are kind of 90s, you know, black artists. And so New York kind of had its own scene.
Yeah. I was going to say, was there much synergy with New York?
Well, we were all in shows together, you know, quite a bit. So I knew some of those artists. You know, I'd met Fred Wilson in New York. I'd met Kara Walker. You know, so we were certainly, there was a kind of conversation going. And then, of course, publications as well. That kind of, because you read about people's work and you were discovering people in, you know, art forum.
Yes, art forum.
Kind of, yeah, so there was a kind of communication there. And, but it's interesting now, you know, we're in France, and most of the things that we read were actually mostly French critical theory, you know, French philosophers. And actually, I would say post-structuralism had a huge influence, you know, postmodernism, post-structuralism, and art was very much part of the cultural discourse, you know, institutional critique, you know, all those things were, you know, everyday things that we just kind of talked about. And I mean, I think it might be a bit different from for a younger generation, but we were politically motivated.
Yes.
You know, the politics drove the work, and politics also drove the kind of images that we made.
Yeah.
You know, and that was actually very important. And even if you go to kind of popular culture, you know, things like The Face magazine. The Face was like, I mean, you know,
It's ID.
it was ID Face.
Yeah.
You know, so it was part of, you know, music. Everything was cut, you know, it was all part of
it
this.
was for magazine created by young people for young people.
Yes.
Which is,
and there was a kind of energy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when, and we're gonna go, when you look back, what do you think the 90s generation left behind? I mean, you know, everyone's successful now. The YBAs happened. Is there something that you particularly miss about growing up in that sort of super creative time? Or have you just like, okay, I've done it and I'm moving on?
I think what I miss is the urgency linked to politics, linked to political emancipation and discourse. It seems that things seem to
So
be.
you have a big head.
That's not a bad thing.
I know.
Yes. So I mean, I think somehow, I don't want to be kind of over romantic, but the market seems to have kind of infiltrated everything. The casual, the way in which we kind of were brave enough to kind of just take over buildings and to, we were creating communities of like a community of radicals, counterculture, which I feel that somehow money is just kind of taking over the whole thing.
That's true. And then let's talk about your work in that period. And of course, we'll talk about your work now.
Yeah.
What was some of the most seminal work? Because I mean, I know the ones I loved, but coming from you, what was the work that you felt really shifted the paradigm for you?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say would probably be Diary of a Victorian Dandy.
Yes.
Because Diary of a Victorian Dandy were originally conceived as huge posters on the London Underground. And so there are 40 stations in the Underground. And as you stood on the platform, it's huge posters. And that was a time when art wasn't actually on the Underground.
No, I mean, even now, when I think of those images on the Underground, it was quite powerful, quite
and it was
unheard of.
and it was a time when the idea of a black man doing this, and having that kind of audacity to do that on the Underground,
Thank God you did.
Yeah, but it was work I felt I needed to make, and I didn't have any money when it was made.
Why the need to make that particular work?
Well, I felt there was some. You see, it's different now. We were actually fighting for visibility. The men were it was visibility that we were fighting for. Now it's not an issue for people. I don't even think people can imagine what that was like. But it was about visibility. And it was also controlling our own narrative. Controlling the image. We needed to take control of that stuff. But the important thing for me, it was important not to, it wasn't about rancor. It wasn't about anger. It was important not to be. It was important for me that it would not be about anger. It was more about parody. And it was the notion of the trickster as well. The idea that you're the kind of Trojan horse and you're infiltrating the system.
Yeah, the system.
But you're not being angry. Because, once you start the anger, then people become defensive and the whole thing.
They don't listen.
Yeah, the whole thing doesn't work anymore.
It's almost like subverting from within.
Yes, but it was also having fun, showing, I can have fun. Yeah. And then it coincided with a time when I was reading a lot of Oscar Wilde as well. Okay. So, Picture of Dorian Gray.
Yeah.
I was also very fond of the work of Hogarth, The Rake's Progress. Yeah. And so I did these images and put myself at the center. And, it was fun. I just took over a kind of stately home with some actors, and we just dressed up. And
where was the home? What was the home?
Well, actually, we were sworn to secrecy. We had to sign a kind of non-disclosure agreement. Non-disclosure agreement. They didn't want, I don't know, they didn't want people to know about this. But anyway, but we took over the house and stayed there for a couple of days and just had fun shooting these pictures.
I remember seeing those sort of pictures, the work of art in the 90s and just being, we didn't know each other, but I was just thinking, oh my God, this artist is really bodacious and big and daring, all those things you say. And and even, I was at the Tate last week and we're going through the artwork Dominique's had, and just even today, it's still so powerful. In a world where we have social media, where we're inundated with images, those images still really sort of stand the test of time, and that's a real testament.
But it's also kind of interesting because I mentioned New York at the time. I mentioned New York. An American artist was kind of just doing amazing things that, and in London, I remember, I was like doing like live drawing, the painting from the nude. Like, why? And then you see the work of this American artist, you think, wow, this is like bold. So it's interesting to also look at context around what were we looking at, what were we reading, what were we seeing, what magazines were we seeing. All of those things sort of went into informing the work. Yeah.
And do you think, sort of course, being British, but also coming from Nigeria and African background, did that also? I mean, how did that? Oh well, there we are. That's one of the most beautiful works you've ever done. How did that influence everything you did, or was that something that wasn't?
What's that?
Being from Nigeria as well as being British.
Yes, I mean, I had to somehow register that kind of bicultural, hybridity in my work. And there's an academic also whose work, Homi Baba, had written about this concept of hybridity, and I'm a living embodiment of that. And I remember going into, one of my tutors came into my space at college, and I was very interested in politics, and I was making work about what was going on in Russia. I was making work about perestroika, and Russia was sort of changing over, and I was fascinated about what would happen at the end of the Cold War, as the Cold War was known then.
Yeah.
And to paint a picture for you, my background, my father would read, Time magazine in Nigeria, National Geographic, and then I came to England.
Yeah.
And my tutor said, "Well, you're African origin. You're of African origin, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, Why aren't you making authentic African art?
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? I'm from Lagos. I listen to Fela Kuti, James Brown.
Yes. Real deal.
So, but he wanted me to produce, quote unquote, ethnic art. And that didn't make sense to me. But then I decided to, in search of my ethnicity or my African authenticity, I ended up in Brixton Market. Then I went.
The great Brixton Market.
Yeah, the Brixton Market. For those of you who don't know, Brixton is a kind of Afro-Caribbean area, African area, really, cool area, a bit edgy, nice markets there. So I went into the African textiles shop. I imagined at the time that those fabrics were authentically African.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware.
The wax.
I wasn't aware of the Dutch origins, like the Indonesian-inspired fabrics produced by the Dutch. They tried the Indonesian market. They didn't want them because they had their own.
Yeah.
So they tried Africa, West Africa. and the fabrics became popular in Africa. I mean, subsequently, the fabrics are made in Africa, and they were made in Africa subsequently, but,
That's the wax fabrics.
yeah, the white
Yeah.
ones, yeah. So I thought, oh, okay, that's great. If you want me to be African and authentic, I will be African, with a twist, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like, parallel to that, I grew up in a house where my mother was a seamstress who worked with those fabrics,
Yeah.
who created incredible dresses, headscarves to the sky, but it was always very authentically African. And when I saw your work, where you used sort of the fabrics to make these sort of incredible Edwardian Victorian shapes, I was mesmerized by them. Really, really mesmerized. How did that come about, the fusion of, I guess, art and fashion? Because
Yeah.
that's my
Well, one of my favorite museums in London is the V&A.
oh, I love it.
So I used to hang out, just go to the V&A, and then I'd be looking at these sort of Victorian dresses, right? And then, in hot places, if you look at kind of Victorian images, they'd be in India and they'd be wearing this kind of Victorian dresses, in the heat. And then I was looking at them and thinking, wouldn't that be interesting to combine? I've got, initially I actually kind of started as a joke because I found it funny.
Incredible.
And, and then the first, there was a show at the Barbican in London. And actually, Guest-curated that show was, do you remember Joe Casely-Hayford?
Oh my God, it was one of my good friends.
Yeah.
Joe Casely-Hayford, if you didn't know,
It was
one of the
it was the
seminal key black designers.
Yeah, exactly. It was really cool. And so Joe Casely-Hayford just kind of rang me and said, oh, I'm doing this show at Barbican, would you like to participate, because of your work and everything? I said, yeah, sure. And then I just, sent in 3 dresses for that exhibition. And it was actually from that exhibition that Charles Saatchi bought the dresses. And they're called How Does a Girl Like You Get to Be a Girl Like You?
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so, and then, so Charles Saatchi bought them, and the rest is history, I guess. Because in those days, right, when I was in a show at there was a project space in Chelsea called Independent Art Space.
Independent art space.
Yeah, and the Charles Saatchi's house was near that place. So, and I was doing, a show with a few friends of mine. And Charles Saatchi had been to see the show. I had a large wall piece called Double Dutch, which Charles Saatchi bought that as well. And but I was told that Charles Saatchi had been in. It was like God. Honestly,
Charles Saatchi at the time was the number one collector.
He was God. I mean, nobody else was buying contemporary.
Yeah.
So I'd heard it been in there. And then a gallery, Stephen Friedman Gallery, that was the week that he picked me up as an artist. And then he sold my work to Charles Saatchi. But then Charles Saatchi didn't fully respond. He expressed interest, but he didn't respond for at least about 4 weeks, right? And that's probably the longest 4 weeks of my entire life. Because I knew that if Charles Saatchi touched you, it was like the Pope.
Yeah. It really was.
Yeah, it was a blessing, you know. And he did. And then I ended up in Sensation. Yeah, and Sensation, for people, that was the seminal YBA exhibition.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, I still, hold on to the catalogue.
Yeah.
And it was such a great time for British art. It still lives on to today.
Well, you can see an image of the young version of myself.
Oh, I've got it.
And then, another thing that I also used to do then it was fashionable because a lot of artists didn't have money.
Yeah.
I didn't have money, so people were kind of really scruffy and everything. I insisted on only wearing suits then. So I dressed more like a businessman than an artist.
Yes. I mean, you were.
Yeah,
Essentially, you had to be back then.
yeah, and I thought, just if people thought I was already successful, then they would,
No, I mean,
the-
it might seem funny, but I remember sort of every time I had to step out to work, I would also wear a suit. Because if I told you the number of times I would walk into a place and be handed, something to deliver. Oh, are you here to pick up something? So there is something about the idea
yes,
of dressing that way,
yeah.
you know.
Well, it was your camouflage.
Yeah.
It was your armor. It was, So it's kind of interesting about, fashion and how kind of culturally loaded and how you could actually use that in your.
Yeah. So it's armor. And as we were saying earlier, the fashion industry's always been a little bit shy about artists. We revere artists so much. But we've talked a lot about the past. Let's talk about now. What is inspiring you now? I know you're doing a lot with Nigeria. I think we'd love to hear where you are now and what really excites you.
Well, I mean, the obvious thing at the moment is, the foundation.
Is it GAS? GAS?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gas Foundation, the artist residency in Nigeria. So the story of that began when I ran a project space in my studio. I did that because a lot of artists didn't have spaces to show. I had this kind of big warehouse, and I could host artists there. And I
Where in
did
Nigeria?
no in London,
I was in London.
in my studio in London. So I ran that for about 11 years. I'd give artists the space to show their work. And I did that because I felt that, process wasn't being celebrated and that failure wasn't being celebrated. The art market was making a lot of younger artists timid. So I wanted to create this experimental space. And then the whole Brexit thing started happening. And the whole kind of xenophobia, the hatred of foreigners or people you don't understand. And I thought that actually the idea of cultural exchange is actually very important. You don't have to be scared about people. Go see people, make friends,
Big friends.
collaborate, develop incredible projects together. So I started from scratch. I bought land in Nigeria, I bought land in the city, and I bought a 54-acre farm.
Wow. Wow, 55 acres?
Yeah, 54 acres. Yeah.
How long ago was this?
I only bought that. I don't know. I bought the farm maybe about 7 years ago or something, and then planted several acres of cashew, bought 10 greenhouses, um, and then built an incredible house for artists there. The architect I worked with excavated the soil, made 40,000 red bricks, and built this fabulous building for artists on a hill overlooking the rest of the farm.
You should really, this building is really something, really modern, great architecture.
Yeah, then in Lagos, I created this building for artist residencies. We've got 3 ensuite bedrooms for artists. We have a project space there. And so the residence is multidisciplinary. So it's ecologists, so you can choose to be on the farm if you want to be dancers, film and photography, painting, and we've had over
All the
100,
disciplines.
yeah, over 100 residents since we started, and And Belinda sitting here does a great job. She's the director of the rest of the program, and she's based in London. And it's great. And we collaborate with a number of institutions. And I've done the first part of it, which is the capital spend, which I've done myself. And the second part of it now is to raise an endowment to actually make it a sustainable project. A lot of artists globally, want to do this residency. I mean, they have a fab time in Lagos.
You hear this? All the artists in this room?
Yeah.
So if somebody here wanted to sort of be a part of the residency, how would they go about it?
Well, they, apply, I guess, right to Belinda. Is that how it works? Yeah. And there's we have a group of selectors. So sometimes it's done by invitation.
Okay.
And also we do collaborations with a number of institutions. We've collaborated with Yale, London College of the Arts, Royal College in London. I mean, the list goes on. But I think it's important. I think it's important for people to, because, the residents have to make a presentation to local people. They meet local artists, local creatives. They exchange ideas, and many of them are still in touch across the globe. I think it's better than Brexit, right?
Much better. Much better. We're nearly at the end, but I just want, I'm always obsessed with the next generation, how the next generation can be better than we were. I believe in sort of mentorship. What would you say to young artists today? You've come from a period where you were really defining what art was and the space that you occupied. What would you say to artists today who are maybe struggling and don't quite know how to get their work seen or whatever? What would you say to young artists today?
I would say to them, you don't need to wait for anyone. Just get it done. I mean, get together with your friends. Don't wait for people to give you stuff. Take what you need. You go out and get it. That's it. You just have to, you have to be self-motivating. And then, of course, always make sure that you absorb enough information. That means theater, seeing lots of other people's work, and be open-minded. Don't be like single-minded. Because you're an artist, it doesn't mean you've only got to be looking at art. You've got to be expansive in your worldview.
Yeah, I really believe that. So, what's next?
Wow. As they say, you're only as good as the last work that you made.
That's what
So keep interested and keep pushing. Keep doing exciting things.
Fantastic. Yinka, thank you very much. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Yinka. Thank you, all of you, for being here. This was an incredibly special moment, and we will all try to be always more expansive in our worldview. That's definitely the way forward. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you for coming.